We're out here talking about maximizing yield in soybeans as we wrap up with irrigation for the season and as we get into harvest. Hi, my name's Kevin Keller. I'm with Pioneer out of South Central Nebraska, and today's agronomy update is brought to you by the Nebraska Soybean Board. We're out here just east of Gibbon, Nebraska, which is in the south central part of the state. As we look across the state, rainfall amounts have varied throughout the season. We've had a fair amount of rainfall here, but as we talk about finishing the season out, irrigation is going to be important as we talk about how do we maximize the yield potential left in these soybeans. And so if you think about soybean size, we could range anywhere from 2,400 seeds per pound to 3,000 pretty easily. And one way to really maximize and get close to that 2,400 seeds per pound is with final irrigation. So that's 25% of your yield potential right there. We think about the water use that's left in our soybean crop. We're at R5 stage. We've got about 20 to 30 days left in this crop, depending on planting date and maturity, but that's going to be somewhere between 4 to 6 inches worth of moisture that soybean plant still needs to utilize. So between irrigation and what we have in the soil, we're looking at about an average use of 20 hundredths per day. So these soybeans are thirsty at the end of the year, and again, those are huge drivers towards yield when you think about potentially 25% of the yield on the line, with just depending on what we get out of that grain weight. So as we get into harvest, let's talk about how do we manage harvest loss and maximize yield potential there. So as we all know, we would really like to combine as much 13% moisture beans as we can, but what does that mean? So shrink between 13 and 8 is roughly about 5.5% of your yield right there in moisture. Then we start talking harvest loss. As we get drier, we're gonna have more harvest loss, where if that's grain that's coming out as far as shatter goes or lost through the combine, we're gonna lose more just because that crop's drier. Another thing we talk about is one of the insects that we have that's fairly prevalent in different parts of the state, which is Dectes stem borer. As that soybean plant becomes drier and drier, the risk of having harvest loss even prior to the combine getting into the field goes up with that insect. So the more timely we can be, I would even say, hey, let's try to get out to the fields and maybe take a little bit of dock on moisture, even if it's 15%. We see that that's where we maximize yield, is really starting harvest around 15 in order to avoid the drier end of the beans on the backside. So then it comes to how do we plan for next year? So a lot of times we'll get into harvest. I know moisture is hard to manage. It's up to Mother Nature in some degree, but there is a certain amount that we can control with that as well. So one way to do that is, we're standing here in front of some different varieties, is really think about how do we maximize our soybean varieties, not only for yield potential, but preserving moisture come harvest. So spreading those maturities out as much as we can is a huge tool that we could utilize. So when we think about that, my general rule of thumb is take the number of days it takes to harvest. Let's say it takes you 12 days to harvest soybeans. Take that, divide it by about 1.1 or 1.2, and that's the maturity spread that we should be looking at and planning on for next year. So if that's a full point of maturity, that would be, in this case, maybe a 2.0 to a 3.0, depending on whatever fits your operation, but that gives us the best opportunity to maximize moistures come harvest. With these management tips, we have an opportunity to manage the soybean crop to its fullest as we round out the year, and I'm looking really forward to seeing what these harvest yields look like this year, given the weather that we've had and the conditions we have in some of our soybean fields. Thanks for watching today's agronomy update, brought to you by the Nebraska Soybean Board.